So, hi all, my name is Chisa Hughes, and I'm a filmmaker and organizer with Hoppy, or Humble Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity, who has put together this event with the generous help of the HSU Library. Thank you also to our co-hosts, Eureka Chinatown Project and the Clark Museum, as well as all of the coalitions and individuals who have amplified this conversation. Um, as you can see, this event is being recorded and will be available later on the Hoppy website, which just went live today. It's hoppyhumboldt.org. I can share that in the chat. We officially went live about an hour ago, so are very excited to share that link. During the first hour of the event, the chat feature will be open to send questions to a moderator only, with the intent to open the chat feature at 6 p.m. for our community discussion. So the name of this program is Humboldt Asian Histories and Futures. It is a reading, presentation, and community discussion. We're coming together today to recognize the past and its reverberations in the present. The history of Chinese exclusions in this county that would inform the settlement of Humboldt, and the ways in which we can respond to that inheritance as community members in solidarity and support of Asian communities and other communities of color in the county. This being particularly amidst the national backdrop of racial violence this year. We also want to honor the diverse community of Asians living in Humboldt. Although this program focuses on the Chinese expulsions, we hope to continue this conversation through coalition with others, Southeast and South Asian folks into the future, as well as all of you and beyond. This context wouldn't make sense without the acknowledgement of the land we sit on in Humboldt, of the Karuk, the Tolowa, the Yurok, the Wiyot, and the Hupa, who continue to remain in relationship with these lands and also work to continue knowledges of this place through their own survivance and stewardship. Eureka's Wiyot name is Jarojiji, which means where you sit and rest. Think as opposed to the settler notion of Eureka, I've found it. So may we work to make this place one where we can all sit and rest safely while paying respect to those whose land we're on. I encourage you to look at honortax.org, which I'll put in the chat, to make an actionable step towards Native sovereignty for the Wiyot people. We all live on traditional Native homelands. If you do not live in Wiyot territory, you can learn more about whose land you are on at nativeland.ca. I'll also share that in the chat. And take steps using the toolkits that are available at the Honor Tax website, which I shared before. So the quote unquote last Chinaman of Humboldt, Charlie Moon, found partnership with a Cholula woman named Minnie and was provided refuge in Redwood Creek. His descendants, who are Hupa, Karuk, and Wiyot people, continue to live here today. Historical accounts also note the refuge provided to Chinese people by local tribes, an incredible testament to resistance and survival through solidarity. We currently find ourselves in another moment of needed coalitional solidarity. Hopefully we can find inspiration from these examples in the past. So I'd like to now turn it over to Jean Failzer and Daryl Nee Chin. Jean is a scholar and author of Driven Out: The Forgotten War Against Chinese Americans. She will be providing a historical background of the Chinese in Humboldt to begin. And Daryl Chin, a longtime resident of Humboldt and Chinese American poet, will be following. He'll be sharing a selection of his poems to inspire us. So thank you all, and I'll turn it over to you now, Jean.
Thank you, and thank you to the organizers who've brought this gathering together. When I was in graduate school, I was also teaching at Humboldt State, and I was living on Yurok land. I am still on Yurok land up in Big Lagoon, which is called, the lagoon is there where we are calm, and the meadow is called there where we dance for ritual celebrations. As I was teaching, and I was young, I was in graduate school, but I grew up in California, I looked around my classroom and I didn't see any Asian students. And when I asked, where were the Asian kids? This doesn't look like California. I was told that 100 years ago, at that point, the Chinese people who were living in Eureka, and this is an image of Eureka's Chinatown, were rounded up and driven out in one night, in 24 hours. There was what we would call an expulsion or a pogrom. The Chinese people in Eureka had asked the Eureka police for protection like other people, and they said Lunar New Year's was coming and that gangsters would be coming up from San Francisco, and they wanted protection, which they weren't given. And there was, in fact, a shootout between two Chinese men, and a city councilman, David Kendall, was killed in the shootout. And within minutes, 600 people had gathered in Centennial Hall to come up with ways to drive out the Chinese people. And the first way was to murder the Chinese people, all of them. I believe there were about just over 300 Chinese people living in Eureka. That was voted down. And the second vote was to burn Chinatown, which was around the block of 5th and E in downtown Eureka. But the Chinese were not allowed to own property in Eureka, and they would have been burning down. The area was owned by the guy that owned the Palace Stables. So he puts up a big protest, don't burn Chinatown. And so the third vote, which won, which was to drive the Chinese out and have them gone within 24 hours. And so on this brutal night of February 5th and 6th of 1885, in the midst of Lunar New Year's, the Chinese packed up everything they could get on two little boats that happened to be in Humboldt Bay. And the vigilantes and the sheriffs marched them down to the pier and then sent other scouts to round up Chinese people who were living in on timberland and on ranches, and also brought them down to the wharf. And on that very cold and terrifying weekend, where the Chinese people were being held in warehouses on the wharf, they were waiting for the tide to be right for these two little ships to sail. The ships sailed on the Sunday night. The wind was from the north, and they arrived in San Francisco on the Monday morning. And the custom house, which was very mindful and resentful of the Chinese and monitored them, wasn't opened yet. The Chinese escape, flee from the ships, and go into Chinatown. And that afternoon, at one of the Chinese merchant companies, they regroup after this horrific weekend. And the Chinese consul from San Francisco makes a historic announcement. It says, we will sue for the damages done to us as a community, and we will sue because mob violence happened to us as a community. Legally, that's beyond a tort action, a damages claim. It really raised it to the first, as far as I'm aware, the first demand for reparations in the United States. So it was a phenomenally resistant, historic, and legally important event. As I was looking into that, what I came upon as I was looking into the Eureka story, what I came upon there were over 300 roundups in the Pacific Northwest and over 200 in California. And I know that because I had to keep going to Office Depot and buying more red dots for the map. This is how it happened. This is a sign I found in Crescent City, and it's a mass meeting of the citizens to devise some lawful means of ridding Crescent City of the Chinese. I think it's important to keep in mind that there are two stories of Chinese immigration into California and the Pacific Northwest. It's very gendered. The men chose to come here for gold, or they were brokered to come here and paid by Crocker to build the Transcontinental Railroad, but the women were not. And about 95% of the Chinese women were kidnapped from the southern port of Guangdong and transported and sold in slave dens at the wharf in San Francisco. And they were kept in brothels and cages like this. This girl looks like, to me, like about 14. And so the experience of Chinese women is very different from the experience of Chinese men. But when they were driven out of Eureka, all of the Chinese were driven out. And on this famous lawsuit for reparations, 2 of the Chinese prostitutes who were not free women signed onto that demand for reparations. So they were phenomenally courageous, and I believe they had managed to run away. There was other acts of violence. In 1871, the Chinatown was targeted in Los Angeles, and 18 Chinese people were lynched. It's one of the largest mass lynchings in the United States. And I got a phone call from a librarian saying, I think you want to see this. And this very painful picture are the bodies after the lynching that were cut down in Los Angeles. But immediately the Chinese people sued, and that was a criminal action to get some of the vigilantes arrested. Other ways that the Chinese were targeted was that you weren't allowed to have a laundry in a wooden building. And of course, so much in Northern California was built on a creek, for the laundry. So if Chinese people couldn't have a laundry in a wooden building, it meant they couldn't work.
So Jean, in your last couple of minutes, did you have any closing remarks?
I think that it's important for us to remember how resistant to the violence the Chinese were. The first Chinese to come back into Humboldt County came back in 1906 to work in a cannery on the Eel River. And there's another mass reaction. This picture was actually taken on Duluwat Island, and the Chinese refused to leave until they've been paid for a full season of work. So they're rounded up in about 8 or 9 days, held on Duluwat in a little short haul railway car, which of course is so iconic to see people forcibly transported in a railroad car. But when they left with their full contract paid for 6 months. So this is the last image of Chinese expulsion from Humboldt County. And behind the barge where people are being taken out to the ships, they were going to go back to Astoria, Oregon, is the Sequoia Yacht Club. So it's a very painful, but a very resistant story. Thank you.
So thank you, Jean. And now Daryl, please. Daryl.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read to you 2 poems. My wife and I and our daughter came to Humboldt County in 1975. And so I want to just speak about how we learn about these things, because Many of these events that we're going to be talking about, I never learned in high school. We didn't learn even about the Holocaust in high school. And I went to high school in the 60s. So a lot of what all of us have learned, we learned kind of willy-nilly. And this first poem, called Not Translation, Not Poetry, is one of the ways in which I learned, because I went to a reading by Maxine Hong Kingston, the author of Woman Warrior and Chinaman. So after the reading, there was a discussion and somebody said, when I read Chinaman, I felt cheated. So this is the poem that comes out of that. Not translation, not poetry. Ask the old men in Chinatown, the ones who washed and ironed in laundries, cooked in restaurants, fished in San Francisco Bay, laid rocks and track from California to Utah, and then down to Los Angeles. These old men remember that the rocks and snow in the Sierras are softer and warmer than memories of interrogators and officials on Angel Island who said, "It is my duty to question your past, to find out if you know where the stove was back in your home in China. And it is my judgment that this man who calls himself your brother and these women who claim to be your wife and mother are liars and will be sent back to China. These men never had a wife to rub their tired shoulders or to warm their bed. They never had children climbing their laps or searching their pockets for quarters or candy. They never heard their mothers or complaining or saw them washing vegetables. Even if they had owned all the tea in China, they never drank tea with their brothers again." That short chapter in the middle of a book about Chinese American dreams fulfilled has no darkness for your dreaming. No scenery, demons, romance, epic, only a spotlight on laws, numbers, facts, dates, history you and I should have learned in the 11th grade. Go back and ask your teachers about the California congressman who used eloquence and power in 1882 to argue and lobby for the exclusion from the pursuit of happiness in America of all Chinese laborers, would-be laundrymen, houseboys, fishermen, farmers, cigar makers, grave diggers. And about the congressman who wrote the law that kept all Chinese women from entering the United States from 1902 to 1946. Wasn't that when your grandparents came to America? Ask the white women who never asked their husbands why they killed Chinese in Utah after they finished a railroad in 1965, in Los Angeles in 1871, in Rock Springs, Wyoming in 1885. Ask the kids who ran to the docks in 1886 to watch their fathers put pigtailed men on steamboats in Humboldt Bay. Ask Judge Kaufman of Detroit, who said in 1982 that Robert Evans and Michael Nix, who killed Vincent Chin with a Louisville slugger, could have probation and a suspended fine because Vincent Chin looked Japanese. Pretend you are Caucasian and pregnant, like Christina Tien of Grand Ledge, Michigan. It is New Year's Day, 1985. Imagine how much warmth and softness you feel when 4 men with knives slash your car tires outside in the snow, break your living room windows and crowbars, and say, "We want to speak with your husband and any other chinks in the house." You don't understand my anger, and I am embarrassed, yet we can sit here among the linen and silver in this candlelit restaurant and talk about the red snapper, the spinach fettuccine with dill and too much garlic, just the way we like it. If you still don't understand, let's say that you and I got illegally married in Maryland. You're white, I'm not. And let's imagine that it is Qingming, that we are pulling weeds from and putting out tea on grandfather's grave in China. Talk, ask, Ask grandfather's grave spirit to tell you more than he told my father, who came to America to be with his brothers. Ask grandfather why the only thing he said about his stay in America was, don't send your sons to Gold Mountain. Now, just to continue on this theme, this is the second poem called Words Like Rice and Snow. And it's one of the ways in which I learned about living in China since I was born in Utah. Words like rice and snow. My rice always comes out too mushy, said Lori. Use less water, I said. But the recipe says 2 cups of water for each cup of rice. Forget the recipe, I said. Just enough water to cover your knuckles. In a Chinese restaurant once, my brother ordered for my sister, me, and him 3 bowls of uncooked rice, he said in Chinese to the waiter, who hesitated and brought us steaming cooked rice. In college anthropology, Dr. Dietz mentioned to us 800 students that Eskimos use 22 names for snow. He didn't tell us what any of those words were. Across the bay from San Francisco and El Cerrito, there wasn't much snow where grandma was living with mom and dad. Nor was there much in the Pearl River Delta near Canton, China, where dad and grandma grew up. So I asked them about the Chinese words for rice. Grandma said she was too tired to remember. Soon she was going to sleep anyway, so why bother? I waited until she started to eat lunch with dad, and then I asked again. At first, they were quiet. It was 40 years since either had been back. Then dad spread his hands to show how tall shoots and plants and stalks grew before they changed names or had to be thinned or cut. Only poor people ate brown rice, he said. Grandma forgot her lunch, got up, hit her head on the hanging lamp, moved back and forth, bent again and again over the floor, pulled up and put down shoots on mom's patterned linoleum. She said you had to stoop all day in a field flooded ankle deep and take each shoot from down in the mud and put it somewhere else in the mud. Ay-ya, growing rice was such hard and tiring work. Uncooked rice, cooked rice, rice crust, rice porridge, rice crust broth, rice flour, rice noodles. I asked my father how to say hello in Chinese. All he knew was the English words with his shy lilt and, in Chinese, have you eaten any rice? Yesterday, we had guests at dinner, snow fungus soup, steamed chicken, bean threads and Chinese sausage, broccoli and black mushrooms in oyster sauce. My wife had gone to pick up our daughter from rehearsal, and everyone was eating fast so we could go to a movie. When Annette, the babysitter, came early, I opened the door. Have you eaten yet? I asked. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Jean and Chisa, for organizing this. We'll hear from you 3 in a little bit when we continue with the panel for the next 40 minutes. But first I wanted to say, Nisik Fanma, have you eaten yet? That was my family's way of saying hello. A more formal way is ni hao, or a less formal way is wei. Ang noi gai sao du la gi la. Let me introduce myself. I am Lei Suyong, better known in Humboldt as Ali Ong Lee, and I'll be your facilitator for the remainder of this program. As I mentioned, we have a panel for the next 40 minutes, and then after that, we'll have 20 minutes of open question and answer session for all of you who are attending today, and we thank you. Adding to our panel, besides Jean, Daryl, and Chisa, we'll have Brianne Murja, and she is the organizer of the Eureka Chinatown project. We will also have Marilyn Pike Nicely. She is active with Humboldt Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity. She's also a former Multicultural Center director at Humboldt State University for 20 years. And for all of our panelists, we will have their extended biographies posted in the chat for you today. So given that Marilyn and Brianne were not able to speak yet, I was wondering if you could start off our panel with telling us something about what you just heard that spoke to you, and something about how you first started your activism for the Asian American community here in Humboldt.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, Marilyn, did you want to go first?
I can't see myself,
Oh.
but that's all right. You go.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. And of course, thank you, Allie, for the introduction, Chisa for putting this on, as well as all the sponsors. Daryl and Jean, I have to say, those were really moving pieces that you presented to us, and I'm really grateful for them. I have to say, at some point, I probably got a little emotional as well, especially seeing all those photos. They're really, really impactful. And the poems you read, Daryl, I think really spoke to the Chinese culture in ways that I've never heard before. So thank you for all of that. Like Allie mentioned, I'm Brianne, or Bree. I'm the Eureka Chinatown project coordinator. And I really came to this project and chose to start getting active in our community here just recently. I moved here a few years ago, and I always knew that this, felt like home to me, but I was missing a big piece. I wasn't really seeing myself or my husband or people, that looked like me in the culture here. And I think that's really important to feeling included in a community. I'm also expecting my first baby soon. And that really, I think, lit a fire under me to want to create a community where myself and my baby will feel included and welcomed in this community. I have to say, it's been really great getting to know the HAPI group. That's the Humboldt Asian and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity group that has formed more recently here in this community, but something we so direly need. I think that the Eureka Chinatown project is the first step to really bringing the Chinese Americans and culture into our community. And that starts with our history. So just to give a little bit of background about the project for those of you that don't know, it really started up only about 45 days ago, 30, 45 days ago. So thank you for everyone who has been part of that. It's really been a community effort, and you see that day in, day out, how much is happening. So we are working on commemorating and celebrating the Chinese history and culture here in Humboldt County, but specifically around Eureka, because that's where Chinatown used to stand before the 1885 expulsion that Jean was mentioning earlier in her presentation. We're working on putting a few monuments together on the block of where Chinatown used to stand. That block is in Eureka, right outside of Old Town, between E and F streets and 4th and 5th. You may know Coast Central Credit Union is there, as well as Ellis Arts and Engineering, Delisha on 5th, all those businesses there on that block. we're hoping to put a plaque in somewhere on that block. We're still working through a location, but really highlighting that Chinatown did stand here, celebrating the Chinese that did live here as well. We're also working on renaming the alleyway that runs through the block and putting up a mural in the alleyway as well to celebrate the life of the Chinese before, but linking it now to the current Chinese population and culture. And also a few informational signs, as well as a self-guided walking tour. And like I mentioned, this is really just a first step, you know, memorializing the past so we can learn from it, but ultimately so we can move forward. And, you know, I'm really, really excited for it. So thank you for having me today and letting me share a little bit.
So Marilyn, did you have anything to add to that? Even though you can't see yourself, that sometimes makes
Now
it
I
easier
can.
to speak on Zoom.
I put it to a gallery and now I can see myself.
Okay.
Well, I thought about that question early on. And so I'm we'll have to think about this, third generation Okinawan Korean and born and raised in Hawaii. And I thought about this question, when did I become politically involved in organizing for the Asian Americans? So in Hawaii, all the communities had their place to be. And I grew up amongst many different, a very diverse group of Asian people. But in my family, you know, we learned the language, we learned cooking, celebrated all the holidays. And I can have these vivid memories of also my grandfather played the shamisen, which is this kind of beautiful Japanese instrument. My cousins and I all learned to play the okoto. We took Japanese dance, we went to bon dances and all these things. And I say this because that was sort of the foundation for me of feeling very supported and my identity. I knew who I was. Then I went to college in Ohio. And I was one of 3 Asian Americans, and the other Asians were from Asia. And that's when I really learned what it was like to be a minority. And I never liked that word minority either, but that feeling of just by myself or very different from other people. And that was also a time when I started to think, where's community? What do I do about community? And I found community. Then I went back to Hawaii, but then coming to Humboldt, I'm going to talk about this because this was really, I think, the beginning of my political involvement with the Asian community. I was at Humboldt State University. I was the director of the Multicultural Center for almost 20 years. And when I first started there, we had one Asian group called the Asian Student Union, ASU, and there were about 2 or 3 members in this group. It's a club. Then I saw it grow. We then had the Hmong Student Association, then APASA, Asian Pacific Americans in Solidarity. And then as I worked with these students, I realized I could just so relate to what they were experiencing. They didn't feel they had community. So that became very important to me. And I also realized that I didn't have that much of a community here also, but I would meet people from Hawaii. I'd meet other Asians and somehow we'd always come together. So that was, once I say this because that built my foundation of what was really important. Then I think if there's the first incident of becoming more political and organizing was Swingposium on the Road. And that was really looking at history and sharing the history of the Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II. And your poem, Daryl, reminded me about history. Like we didn't learn a lot in high school about all the Asian people in the country. There was maybe one paragraph about the incarceration of the Japanese Americans. And so that really brought it kind of full circuit for me, that it was important for us to share our history, share our traditions, share who we are. And then I think what sealed the deal for me was the pandemic. And when the then president called it the China flu and had all these terrible things to say about the pandemic and tying it to Asians. And then what followed, as we all know, was anti-Asian acts of hate, violence. And that was very difficult to read about and to watch on TV, all that. You know, as seeing when African-American people or Latinos, when violence happened to them, my heart hurt, and I felt for the people. When this started happening to Asian, especially older Asian women, then it became like family. And I'm like, wow, that could have been my auntie. That could have been my mom. That could be me right now because I'm kind of elder too. And so that became very important to really come together and work together in solidarity with other groups. And as we moved from Taiko Swing Humboldt to Humboldt Asians and Pacific Islanders in solidarity, it just felt so right to be organizing and building our community. So I thought that's a long story for where I'm at right now. But I think for many of us, it is that feeling of wanting community, wanting connection, wanting networking. And it's just been so wonderful to do with all these amazing people here.
So for you, Marilyn, you drew parallels between the anti-Asian sentiment that's brought up by recent events and the pandemic, and it connected you to the anti-Asian sentiment that was happening in the 1880s through the Exclusion Act and the expulsions that Jean talked about in the history. I wonder for our other panelists, I'm going to open up to all of you, including you, Chisa. What other things that you've been learning about the expulsions, the histories of the Chinese in Humboldt and Asians in general that have surprised you, it's informing you now that you would like to share with our audience today? Okay.
Okay, I'll pick it up. Yeah, I'm not a historian. I'm not the smartest person in the room. I'm here out of passion. I'm here out of culture and heritage and community. But something that is surprising or not to you is history continues to repeat itself. And if we don't take a moment to learn what happened in the past, we're just going to continue down the same road. And I would really like to take this opportunity to change that road and to move it in a different direction. Systemic racism is something that's deep rooted in our country, and we need to, it's not going to be an overnight change. We're going to have to put in a lot of hard work for it. But ultimately, I think we need to learn a little bit first and kind of understand, where are we coming from? How did this look before? And what does it look like now? Because it does sometimes look very similar. And we're seeing the same reoccurring themes. We're seeing Chinese and Asian Americans used as scapegoats to say that we're taking jobs, or we're dirty, or we're disease carrying. This is all something that happened back in the 1800s during the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was national. And then the local reactions to that, the expulsions of 1885 here in Eureka, and then continuing on. for the next 20 years or so. And so, you know, I think if we don't take a moment to look back and understand how these came about, how these events came about, and what really happened, we can't really move forward on the right foot. And so, again, maybe you already know that or not, but for me, the more I learn about our history, especially here in Eureka, the more I'm really understanding what's happening now.
I could add to that. I'm going to mute this person. Does that work? Okay. I don't know if I've officially joined. I am not an actual participant in this panel, but I have been working on a film that looks at the history of Chinese expulsions and looks at the mythology of Charlie Moon and sort of the white settler salvage mythology of Charlie Moon being sort of the last Chinaman of Humboldt. And I do think that the sort of invisibilizing of Asians has a lot to do with this violence not being remembered. I think like there's certainly a pattern in history of dismissal and invisibility, whether it was not recognizing Chinese people as or as citizens, or the Chinese Exclusion Act, or the internment, etc. There's absolutely been a pattern, and I would say like a very purposeful sort of model minority stereotyping that happens that also leads to erasure. So that all feels connected in sort of this, what I see as a really hopeful move towards being a visible, organized, multi-coalitional presence, and placemaking by making ourselves known in a different way, I hope. And while also recognizing this history that as a half Japanese kid growing up in Humboldt, I wasn't aware of. So I see all of these things as being related.
Daryl, I know you think a lot about placemaking in your work. Can you speak a little bit more about the placemaking that you see for the community going forward?
Well, one of the things that I think is really nice is that Brianne came on the scene, and she started saying, we had a conversation. She says, well, can we meet on Zoom? And I said, no, I want to meet in person. And so we went out to lunch, and then we took off from there. I mean, she just jumped on it and grabbed us all and corralled us in, and it also helped that everybody was ready for this. And it also, as Marilyn says, the pandemic did something to us. Okay, so when we talk about placemaking, I think we're asserting our place, and I think that's good. So politically and socially and personally, I think it's very helpful that we are asserting ourselves, and we are also including people, and we are open to including others. The other thing that I think is really important is that we need to assert the need for leadership, and in a broader context in the society. That's really difficult because a lot of Asians and not as Chinese have been kind of retiring from they've been afraid of the legal and political process, because they've had to fight really hard for what gains they have had. And then politically in the newspaper and stuff like that, it hasn't been easy. They haven't been treated, Asians haven't been treated well in whatever, in many instances you're talking about, in the media, in the movies, and so on. And so I think that it's really important to develop coalitions with other groups and to say, this is our place and we want our place in it. It's important to say that not all of us know Kung Fu and can't defend ourselves. Okay, it really hardened me to see that woman in San Francisco strike back at that guy that jumped on her, but that's an exception. And so there have been the equivalent of the angels in New York, that there have been the Chinese equivalents in the Chinatowns, various Chinatowns in the United States. So our place in this community, our place is what we make it and is what we advocate for. Okay, we can't say, oh, it'll be fine, because you never know when it's not going to be.
So I was going to say that I'm glad Chisa brought up that term model minority, because I think that was something placed on us. We didn't say we wanted to be the model minority. It was just sort of like, oh, here you go. And that is like one of the worst things that could have happened, because it was a silencer. And we're like, okay, I guess if I'm that, then I shouldn't talk so much. I shouldn't do this. And that's the other thing too, is that the grouping of all these incredibly diverse cultures and ethnicities into one word, Asian. You know, I think it's really important for all of us to acknowledge each other and where we come from. You know, I always ask my students, tell me a story about your grandmother, you know, tell me about where she came from and all this. So I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that and continue that way. I love that we can be that way too, but demystify that model minority and just get rid of it. So thank you for talking about that, Chisa.
Soon we're going to open up to the audience for the question and answer period. And before that happens, there's a chance for you, Jean, to, your presentation got cut a little bit short. Is there something you wanted to make sure everyone heard going forward? Something that you wanted them to take away from your knowledge of the expulsions locally, to how that could inform and move us forward? Jean, I believe you're muted.
I'm sorry. I think the shadow of the attack on the women in Atlanta has been focusing attention on what can happen if this isn't addressed. It also harkens to so many things we've been talking about tonight, about the invisibility, that it took a week for us to get the names of the women. It deconstructed the idea that they were enslaved, and that one of the women was 70, two of the women were 50. It took away a lot of as we found out the truths, and people gave voice and had the safety to give voice. We don't still know if these women were undocumented. We don't know if they were trafficked. And I think it's really brought together, in my mind, the layering of racism, of gender, of contagion, of stereotypes, of disinformation, of the police who took so long to jump into this. And it just reminded me of what happened down the road from Humboldt in Antioch, when one morning the town doctor comes out and says that a bunch of little boys, little white boys, have syphilis, and they immediately blame the Chinese prostitutes who were unfree women in Antioch, and they load them on a ship and they send the ship up the Delta. And then that night, the women are very angry and they come back. And the mysteries of these Chinese women did not come to this country with syphilis. They got it through their clients, and They were the ones who were attacked for bringing contagion into the community when contagion circulates, as we now know in so many ways. And so that memory has gone up against a really important piece of information that I didn't know until recently, which is that I knew that the Chinese people found in the 14th Amendment that the 14th Amendment, which is our civil rights amendment, it's probably one of the most important pieces of our legislation. The Chinese people found that it granted civil rights to all persons, not to all citizens. And it was a Chinese prostitute, Chui Lai, who was suing for her right to enter the country, who brought forth at the level of the Supreme Court, this hugely disempowered woman, that the notion that any child born in the United States was a citizen. And she claims her rights as a citizen. And so I think the notion of the model minority being obedient or subservient or docile, just history can help us move forward by blowing up those stereotypes.
Also, blowing up the stereotypes that the women in Atlanta were sex workers, were spa workers, were only these things that we slotted them for, and expanding that narrative of possibility for people. And would panel members like to speak to expanding that narrative, especially here in Humboldt?
Daryl, you should go ahead.
You should, I think that the whole thing, there's a lot of Puritanism in those charges or alleged offenses of those women in Atlanta. It's not restricted to Asian women. So, I mean, I just read yesterday that one of the major football teams had fired their masseuse because the masseuse actively solicited them. So, you know, the whole idea of body work in America needs constant re-examination. Okay, so as far as the women are concerned, you know, there's also the whole idea of miscegenation that, you know, until 1967, when the Supreme Court struck in Loving versus the state of Virginia, struck down the practice of anti-miscegenation laws. You know, my wife and I first got married in New York State and then moved to Maryland in 1968. And then I have a cousin who got married in Seattle. She was born in Los Angeles and she was living in Utah. She had to get married in Seattle because she married a white man in the 50s. So the whole idea of who we are has a standard that if you're not white, there's something else that's going on. And finally, the actress who played, I'm sorry, the name escapes me. There was an early silent movie actress.
Anna May
Okay.
Wong.
Yes. Okay. She refused after a while and working in Hollywood. She's a Los Angeles born girl, Chinese woman. And she refused to work in Hollywood because they kept stereotyping her and saying, you got to be the exotic woman or else we don't have a role for you. So she said, I'm out of here. So.
I appreciate those comments, Daryl, and I was going to also add that I think some strange part of that story for me was that had they been sex workers, that that would have been, I think there was a way in which um, that was further invisibilizing that maybe because of those details, other aspects of their lives weren't brought forth. And I just remember reading an article that came out later, much later, about sort of details about their biographies and reading about how one of the women would bring sweet potatoes to the taxi driver who she would get a ride from every day, or that in between the spas, they had created this garden where they were growing vegetables from. And it's those details that they deserved. And, you know, whether it was in the police's account or the media's account, at first it was uh, these women were talked about as a temptation, you know, a temptation to be ri- to be ridden of, and this guy was just having a bad day. And so I think hearing those stories later, those details about people, um, it was it was satisfying to learn more about them, but also very painful.
Yes, when the sheriff said the killer was having a bad day, I thought, is he the only person that was having a bad day? I mean, what about the people he shot? Weren't they? So, I mean, and if you've ever gone to a Chinese massage, and you can do that in Humboldt County, it's fully clothed. There's nothing sexual about it. You walk out of there and you feel like you've been really worked over. You have to really, it's invigorating, and but it's also exhausting.
I think that the one of the things about what happened in Atlanta for me is to think both locally and nationally. And it's made me think about what's happening in Georgia to take away people's voting rights, and also issues of gun control and violence, that this man who was a murderer was sort of dismissed as being a sex addict. And that we need to, as we think of how we move forward and how we move forward politically, and as we form community locally, it's also, I think, important to take it to the larger questions of what do we do and what do we ask for in terms of who's getting vaccines, who's getting medical care, who's marked as diseased, who has the right to vote and can easily vote, and the issue of gun control, that there are national as well as the local urgencies as we mark the Asian experience in Humboldt.
I think that's a perfect time to shift gears and open up to the public audience. We have 76 participants who are looking forward to joining this conversation. And Jean, that was a perfect segue. And the siren in the background, I don't know if you planned that, but that was that was a bonus for underscoring what's going on. So if Victoria wouldn't mind opening up the chat to everyone to pose questions, and you can pose them to the panel in general, or you can pose them to individuals on the panel. We'll start to address your questions or comments now.
We could also work through some of the questions that have been submitted by people, but if you did submit a question, I'd encourage you to just ask aloud so people can see you and meet you over Zoom.
And I just want to underscore Comments or statements must be relevant to the purpose of this discussion and must be done in a respectful manner. So there's a question from Aristia that I just lost. Where is it?
Oh, it says, when has cross-racial solidarity been most impactful for you?
Again, this is open up to all the panelists.
Well, I'll just start off by throwing something out there, and that is um, r- racial solidarity has been most impactful when it's been inclusive. Um, you know, in this country, you know, what is it? The melting pot. Okay. Believing in some ways that we're all the same. And we are. You know, any number of people have said to me, you know, um, or what is it in a song that somebody said, you know, the president of the United States has to put on his pants one by one foot after the other. Okay. And there are coarser equivalents of that expression. So it's in Humboldt County. I think the special thing about Humboldt County is I can't say I'm only going to be Chinese. I can't say I'm only going to be one thing or another, because that sets me apart as being, I'm going to do this alone. And I think that's sometimes you have to do things alone, but many times you don't. So learning to be political, learning to be friends with people, learning to be open and to bring people together, that's something I found that I like to do. So.
Marilyn, you wanted to comment on that as well?
Well, I was going to say that's what our country is about. You know, we all come from, except say for the Native people, we all come from a different place. And we come together, and I think it's always so important to find what we have in common and share that, but also really enjoying and embracing our differences. And I go back a lot to my work at the Multicultural Center, because it was so gratifying to bring all these different students with different backgrounds and different histories together, and have them share what they were going through, and what the vision for the future would be. And I miss that a lot. And that's where I think having Hoppy come together, meeting Bree, working on this project together, that's what we're doing. And I feel like the more we can do that, it's an important thing to do. What brought my family to this area, my husband, Tim, is a doctor at United Indian Health Services. And talk about a community embracing someone else. The Native community really embraced our family, and I learned from them that it's just so important to do that wherever you go, and to always, build a home. And in Hawaii, we say, grow your ohana, which is family. And I think that's so important to do. And to come to solidarity, especially when something happens to a certain community, come and support them, be with them, and really work together to just make things better for each other. So I think that's a way of life, is working across racial lines and working in solidarity.
In the chat, Sean would like the panel to comment on the use of the term Oriental by the county public health officer.
I just raised that as an example of a very current thing. If folks didn't see it, there was a report in the North Coast Journal, and the public health officer referred to the Oriental population. And there was an editor's note sort of swiftly sort of pointing out that term is probably inappropriate. Anyway, it fascinated me that, yeah. But I was just curious if there were comments about the term and maybe the language that we use. Sort of, I think the comments about Pan Asia, and then even the name Hopi, sort of, I'm thinking about my Filipino friends going, I hope I assume they're included. Anyway, thank you very much for the discussion.
I think the word Oriental brings back the experience I had in 1969 when I went to get a driver's license in Maryland. And name, address, blah, 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 race. And I thought for a moment, and I finally put C. And the examiner says, oh no, son, you don't want to do that. He says, that stands for colored. So I said, what should I put? And he thought for a moment, he said, let's put Oriental. O for Oriental. My wife, when she heard the story, went up and got her driver's license, and she also put C, just to put him through those steps. Anyway, but I think in direct answer to your question, Sean, I think that people, I have to take the attitude that we have to be generous, that people learn at different times at different rates. And if the editor put a note on there, maybe the health officer will notice that. And if he doesn't, maybe a note to him or him might change his thinking.
So there's 72 participants and 72 letters to the public health officer. Might be an interesting tactic.
I was also going to say that it's also a generational term. You know, I think my mom's generation, they use the word Oriental quite a bit. In fact, I don't think they ever said Asian, because we also would describe people by their ethnicity and their ancestry. So it wasn't that Asian woman, it was, oh, you know, that Japanese Korean woman or whatever. So I think it doesn't offend me as much as a lot of people, because I could hear my mom using that term Oriental, and it came from a place of this is just what it is. So in my generation, no one wanted to use that word, and Asian became the word to use. But even Asian, I think sometimes I tell this story about the student I had at Humboldt from Hawaii, and he's a Japanese American. And he came to my office one day and he said, so Auntie, what is this Asian thing? Okay, so this is someone who's probably now in his 30s. And I said, well, what do you mean? He goes, this group asked me if I want to be in this Asian group. What is that? And I said, well, you know, in Hawaii, we all identify with our ethnicities, our ancestries. You cross the ocean and you come to the mainland and you just become Asian. He looked at me and I laughed. I said, this is what it's about. It's a political term that came out of the 60s when we're fighting for human rights and the right for everyone, you know, to vote, to do this, civil rights. And so I said, it's a political term, and we are embracing that word, Asian American. And then he was like, okay. So it's generational, regional, where you're from. Yeah, that's what I have to say about that word, Oriental.
And political. And Sherry Wu brings up a point. There's a statistic that income inequality is highest among Asian Americans compared to other people of color. Do you think more, I don't know why I'm having trouble, more well-off Asians will be a force that can help fight racism this time around?
I don't know. First of all, I think correct me if I'm wrong, Sherry, but when it says there a statistic that income inequality is highest among Asian Americans compared to other people of color. And I think what that's saying is that the income levels of Asian Americans are higher than other people of color.
My understanding is there's the gap between wealthy Asians and Asians in poverty. That's how I read it.
Yeah, the largest gap
The
between.
largest gap. Yeah.
The largest gap
Highest
between the highest earning Asians and the lowest earning Asians,
Mhm,
so we say.
mhm.
Or the lowest earning Asians.
Yeah, and I think, I don't think that a lot of people know about that statistic. Okay. I think that in general, I don't see that, I don't see that talked about at all in the news. And I'm a news junkie, and I think I would see these kinds of things. But I mean, what do I know?
Yeah, I think that speaks to the plurality of the Asian American experience, and illustrated once again by the Georgia massacre. The person who owned the spas, like a big political figure in Georgia, is Asian American himself, while these undocumented workers in his spas are also Asian American. And so that I think that story really illustrates the vast difference in experiences. And to the question about privilege and whether people will whether people in the community will use their privilege to sort of towards redistribution of and towards like this the problems that the community contends with, especially now. I really hope that people do. I hope that people see this as a way to redistribute wealth and redistribute power too. But I don't know.
I think also that the word that I think this really adds to our discussion, because we haven't really been talking about labor, although we've been talking about it all night, and we haven't really been talking about class and income inequality, although we've been talking about it all night. And many migrants come here for certain kinds of political freedom, or they come for work, or because if they're trafficked, they are brought here in order to work unpaid and unfree. And I think that we're seeing this in Humboldt. If we look at, for example, I believe that in the marijuana grows, that there are a lot of undocumented workers, and generally, both in the service sector and the agricultural sector are where new migrants can enter the economy. And so I think it's important as we think about this community to really think about what people are doing here for work and what their status is and the vulnerabilities they are, and being taken into labor forces where they're particularly vulnerable. And it's also a place where I believe the Asian communities will also meet up with the Latinx communities, will be at places of work, in restaurants and in the fields. So as we expand our thinking, I think we need to think about work.
Charles, you had a comment or a question?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
I would just wanted to express my gratitude. That was a very powerful presentation to all the presenters, and the previous commenter that had mentioned the Filipinos, me being Filipino American. Sometimes we kind of in Asian communities we kind of lump ourselves in different groups and whatnot. But after listening to Sir Daryl, I really feel like comfortable using the terminology Asian American instead of kind of using the divisive terminology. But for those of us that are very interested in becoming involved in the Asian activism, Asian community here in Humboldt, what can we do to to reach out or to offer ourselves up for being in a leadership role in the community, or getting involved, or such as the story of Brianne. It's so inspirational, as Daryl said, going out to lunch and her taking that leadership role and running with it. So those of us that are interested in becoming involved in helping support the Asian community and their cause, what can we do? Thank you.
Well, Amy Ueki in capital letters has chatted, join HAPI, the Humboldt Asians and Pacific Islanders group that's sponsoring this panel tonight. Kati mentioned in the comments that it may have been Supervisor Madrone who made that comment using the term Oriental. I'm not fact checking right now because I'm here with you. So we should research that. And then I wonder if I could put Ron or Aristia on the spot, because they are with Equity Alliance via the Humboldt Area Foundation, and they are doing a recent series regarding getting people involved in public office who are identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color.
Thank you, Ali. Yeah, we've been doing an event every month. Usually it's the third Thursday of the month. This month we're bumping it back 1 week, so I think it's the 27th. But it is a session that the first half we spend with people who identify in part or in whole as Black, Indigenous, people of color, and really trying to just digest news together, because it's really important to be able to process together, I think. And then this month's topic, our second half, will be about what it means to run for local office. And then we have a separate group that we're calling the BIPOC Electeds group. And that group is working on building solidarity amongst BIPOC folks who currently serve on school boards or city councils, or are appointed to various positions. So I'll put my email in the chat if anyone is curious about joining any of those, and make sure I get you the information. And thank you for having this event.
And I would just add that part of the inspiration here is that as the Equity Alliance has been doing more and more workshops around this county, there's always the request of, how can we find more? How can we find more people of color to fill this position, that position, recruit, retain, and it's fairly clear that actually no one kind of loves us the way we can love each other without a great deal of practice. And so we tend to see talent, we tend to see leadership more quickly than colleagues who haven't had as much experience with us. And so rather than waiting for them to find our talent, we would like to concertedly advance this talent into positions of governance and power that can begin to make those choices. And, we stand in solidarity with everyone who stands for racial justice. But it is, the people of color in Humboldt County make up about 27% collectively. That's a significant number. And we need to be in more positions of power. I want to thank Ali for actually pioneering, I would rather use the term, for leading us in really pointing out the importance of assuming offices and commissions, public service, and the need for people of color to sort of move forward in that. I think my first conversation was with her. And Aristea has been the leader in providing on the ground information and services, and herself being elected to a school board. So thank you all.
Terry Ueki, did you want to unmute yourself? You have a really long comment in the chat, and maybe you want to just verbalize that.
Okay, I'm sorry for the length of my question, which I prefaced with, I was sort of taking notes during the different presentations, and I was struck by the fact that the reason Chinatown wasn't burned down here is because the Chinese couldn't own any property. Whereas in Tulsa, during what they called the race riots, or actually the massacre, they did burn down the community and also ran those people out of town, as well as murdering freely with state support. So there's been a lot, of course, of legal sanctioning and discrimination against people of color. And I guess my question is, and this was posed by a community member here, a person of color, is whether there would be interest in having a peaceful protest against this increase in violence and hate against Asians, which is not a new thing, as we've talked about tonight. And I am a person who has not only gone to and in support of Black Lives Matter, but have also helped to organize marches. But I guess my question is to both the panel and those who are participating in the audience is there interest in having something like that at the courthouse, or, you know, are we looking at other means such as the running for office that Ron and Aristea just talked about, or even tonight's example of the panel? How do people feel about that? And I'm also asking people in the audience.
I'm curious about hearing from people in the audience in relation to that question. I want to hear more from the community tuning in.
While the community is thinking of a response to Terry's question, Yolanda wrote, I am the great granddaughter of Charlie Moon. My great grandmother was Bessie Moon, half Redwood Creek and half Chinese. We have a very large family. We have family all over the country. We also have had many of our men, women serve this country in the US military and through the draft. We are still here and we are active and proud. We assemble a few times a year at Redwood Creek, just outside of Blue Lake, California, but hello. Yolanda, did you want to show your face and speak? You're welcome to join this conversation beyond chat if you would like.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
I'm not seeing your box, your rectangle. So if Victoria could let Yolanda in at any time, please do.
Oh, Yolanda said I dialed in.
Okay.
Yolanda, could you speak now?
Victoria could make that happen, the phone, just the voice, that would be fabulous. Thank you.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, Ali.
And go ahead.
For a phone call, for somebody to unmute, they'd have to press *6 to unmute.
Hi guys, how are you?
Hi, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, this is, I sit on WebEx all day and I never do Zoom. This is new to me.
We're so
Well,
glad you're here.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Bessie Moon's I believe a great granddaughter, and we have a massive family in Humboldt and Delmer, all over this country. We're so proud to be part Chinese. There's a long history. Everybody has pictures of Charlie Moon. I think there's one with him and one of the first electric companies, because he had helped them as labor to help put in the electric lines. And then he was a ranch hand for Bear family up in Redwood Creek, and they protected him up there. And then he met a Redwood Creek woman and married. I'm not sure if they were married or not. You guys probably know more detail in that area, but they had between 8 and 9 children. And of those 8 and 9 children, Bessie was just one. There's 8 others, and we touch every tribe in this area. There is a person from our family that is in part of every tribe in the area. Wiyot, Trinidad, Yurok, Rosagini, Smith River, you name it, Blue Lake. And we're all related, and we all stick together. But I could not resist joining this conversation because we're so proud. We even have t-shirts. We have 80 acres in Blue Lake, California, and we started a nonprofit down there, and it's called Moon Creek Corporation. And we really don't tell a lot of people because we have it's private property. And as you know, with indigenous artifacts, it's a very unique situation. We're half Chinese and we're half indigenous of the Redwood Creek people, which are considered to be gone. So we don't want to tell people a lot about a lot of things. So we're very private. But I'm sure the details are out there, but I'm very proud to be here. I have a lot of family that's out there, and I've spread the word to them, and they call it the native grapevine. So the word's been spread about the project. I read about it in the paper, and I was like, oh, I wonder what this is about. And the reason I read the paper a lot is because I'm actually the executive director of Moon Creek Corporation, so I'm kind of the pulse of the group. So I try to keep everybody in contact because a lot of our elders don't have cell phones, and they have landlines, like old school days. So, and we're always protective of them. And so we kind of, with COVID and pandemic, we're always very, very protective. So, but no, we're here. I don't want to hog this whole conversation because Charlie Moon's a very interesting fella, and there's a long story. And so, and I come from a half native, so our whole tradition's based on the oral tradition. So I could go on, and I guarantee there's cousins out there that could go on and on too. But I'm very happy to see you all and seeing that you're healthy, smiling. It has been very hard for everybody. And I love seeing all these faces. It's amazing. And what's going on in this country is very disappointing, but it's also waking us up. The pandemic, I think Daryl had said it, it's changed us. And I'm happy to have this conversation.
Oh, Yolanda, we're so happy you participated in today and that you might be part of the Eureka Chinatown project. Jerry Martin wrote, "Thank you all, an honor to your courage for coming out to make this statement. You embody William Faulkner's remark that the past is not over. It's not even past. We have a long way to go, and this is a big step toward a multicultural future. The Moon family was among my Manila neighbors for many years, yet I never heard their story or why they were spared the expulsion. One of their family was useful to a white man. We have a long way to go."
There are other people here saying, great to have you here and hear your voice, Yolanda. And thank you, Yolanda. So glad you spoke up. And Ron White saying social solidarity embodied in a single family.
And Sean would like to know how people can get involved with the Eureka Chinatown project. And I think we'll let Bree take that one.
Oh, yes, that's so exciting. And Yolanda, it's great to hear from you too. We've been Facebook chatting, so hopefully we'll get to meet in person next weekend for a little walking tour. But it's just like this. These connections, I'm telling you, is what's pushing this project forward day in and day out. I spam a lot of emails, but also to see how many emails come in every day is just so empowering. And it's so exciting to this project. So please continue to reach out. If you're interested in helping, you can absolutely send us an email at eurekachinatownproject@gmail.com. If you just want to follow along and see how things are going, make sure to check back on happyhumboldt.org's website and watch progress notes, or you can follow us along on Instagram at Eureka Chinatown Project. If you kind of want to just take a back seat too, and you just want to support the project, we have a GoFundMe, which I've dropped in the link. You can also, I've dropped in the chat, and you can also find that on happyhumboldt.org as well. This project is made up of the whole community. We have people here, everyone on this call here today is part of the Eureka Chinatown Project. We have community members, we have historians, we have people from Humboldt State. From the press, honestly, it's so multifaceted. It's what we need. So if you're interested in getting involved, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you, guys.
So it looks like Vita Hofweber will be there, and those are some great concluding remarks you made for us today. I would really like to reiterate the thanks to Teresa Hughes for organizing this event tonight. Thank you to the Humboldt Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity for sponsoring this. Thank you to the co-sponsors, the Clark Historical Museum and L4HSU. Thank you to all of you for participating, and this is the first of many, many conversations. And as Marilyn Pike nicely said, grow your ohana. Love you all. Bye-bye.